Interesting distribution. Most people are on this side of the room, and I'm kind of curious why. Oh, never mind. Duh. You're right. You're right. That makes perfect sense. Of course. So that means those people over here, you must have really good eyes. Yeah? Or you don't care what's on the screen. Either way. If you have trouble seeing, just come on forward. I don't bite much, unless you ask. Hi. Good morning. My name is Jeff Probst, and today we're going to be ranting at length about Ansible, just like we did last year. Different topics, though. We're actually going to try and make Ansible slightly better this time. And just like last year, I have to start with this caveat because I could say things that current Ansible developers might hate or current users. If any Ansible developers are in the crowd, talk to me after. I'll apologize, but I'm going to be a little confrontational in here. So, before I begin, how many of you in this room use Ansible in your day job or hobby? Yeah, that's a good 70% of the room. So, I'm sorry? Okay, so we have a couple of people that do not use it, so you're just here to learn how bad it is, so when someone asks you to use it, you can be like, no, I saw this talk itself, and it was like, this guy's like, this is bad, and that's bad, and that's bad. You'll be armed, don't worry. So for those of you that use Ansible, how many of you like it? Wow, that's, well, some hands, some timid hands. How many of you really hate it like I do? Okay, a couple more hands. Well, part of the reason I hate it is because of, well, we went over this last year, inconsistency, and it kind of evolved really fast, and a whole bunch of other reasons. And I've spent the last year fighting with it some more and coming up with some solutions to fix some of these terrible things. But really, you can't get around the fact that Ansible is pretty clunky. If you try and do anything outside of basic module stuff, simple stuff, it starts getting really dangerous, actually. I have never been a fan of the default operation of, we're going to write a playbook that runs against all your hosts and then expect you to limit to the actual host you want. That's just so dangerous. How many of you have accidentally run your playbook against more hosts than you intended to in production and caused a problem? Yeah. Tools should give you sane defaults. Tools should help you make safe choices. In Ansible, it's built this way. It's not a safe choice. So that's near the top of my list of why I hate it. Also, I really hate maintaining inventories. You know, Saltstack has an inventory built in. It's KPI infrastructure, it's all built in right there. Check-in mechanism, everything. I know Ansible was developed to be simple and to use SSH, but you spend a lot of time cultivating your inventory and making sure it's right, and you're also using that inventory heavily for how do I target my systems to run my playbooks. So you spend a lot of time just futzing with your inventory. I know it's just a text file. Okay, it's easy to manipulate until you start doing dynamic inventory. Now you got to start calling scripts, going out to AWS to fetch, or Rackspace, or wherever, or we use an on-premises cloud in VMware, so we have to go do it a different way. And our records keeping wasn't very good. So I ended up writing this inventory plugin for Ansible that went out and scraped data from our domain, and then compared it against systems it could find based upon some other key facts, and then it would build this inventory. It was like 2,000 lines of stupidity because I don't want to maintain all that by hand, and it changes too often. So I kind of, I hate inventory management in Ansible, but it's something we deal with. Another thing I really hate, something I've struggled with for years, it's really difficult to write user-friendly tools because Ansible isn't code, right? They take great pains to say that in the documentation, and anytime you go into the IRC channel or anything, ask for help. Ansible's not code, right? But you're writing tools and automation that people use, and they expect, I've got a tool, I give it some input, it should just work on the output. And that's programming. That's a filter. That's programming, right? There's no way around it. So if I want to write a tool that helps a user not make mistakes, Ansible gets in my way. It makes it incredibly difficult to do quality, like pre-checking of conditions. I have to do all this boilerplate stuff and pre-flight checks, and man, it's aggravating. Now I recognize that other Saltstack is better, but not greatly better at it. It's a complaint I have of maybe the whole wing of tools here. But Ansible is particularly terrible at it. I have to trick Ansible into doing what I want in order to protect the users from themselves. And you know, if you've been writing automation that other people use, Ansible's not the most user-friendly, even if you're using Tower. It's kind of clunky, first point. So if you've got someone who's unfamiliar with Ansible trying to operate one of your automations, you really need to add a lot of protections in there. And Ansible doesn't make it easy. And this is a very personal opinion, I just feel like it wasn't very well thought out. So we had good evolution of Ansible all the way through about 2018, 2019. Ansible 2.9 comes out in 2019. They introduce collections. They go through a big reorganization in 2019 and 2020. And everything gets turned upside down. It seems immediately obvious that you wouldn't want to write your code base as one big monolith, but that's what they were doing for years. It seems like, why would you not make it modular to begin with? Why wouldn't you build collections in from the beginning? Who thought that they weren't going to go there? It's hard to graft on something like that after the fact. When you begin writing the tool and you're thinking ahead, like we're going to have collections someday, so we need to make sure this module stuff works, and we're a little bit hygienic about how we're bringing in code. Part of the problem they had in delivering collections, which is why it took like a year and a half, is because they had just a lot of terrible code they were trying to rewrite to support modularization. It just wasn't well thought out. That's not a tool that you want to use. Unfortunately, I have to at work. So I deal with our problems. Here we go. Ansible's not a programming tool, but this sure looks like code to me. Does that look like code to anybody else? Sorry if you can't see it. It's not actually a console, so I can't zoom it. But it ends up looking like code. You're running a series of imperative steps at times. And I know you're supposed to be writing idempotent code in Ansible. That's the ideal. Sometimes you can't. We try at work to do a role enforces idempotency, and if you have a change, that goes in a playbook. That seems to work pretty well. But I'm writing code in Ansible even if they say it's not code. That's just the long and the short of it. And I expect a lot of people here are. If you're only writing code for yourself, okay, you can make it as ugly as you want, right? But most of us are not writing code that only we will ever operate. And most of us are not going to be in the same job forever, which means when we leave, someone else has to maintain what we wrote. Therefore, we should be writing maintainable code that someone else can read and fix and upgrade and swear about too. Can't tell you how many times I've looked at code and like, who wrote this? And it turns out it was me 3 years ago. Yeah, not a good look. So one of the big problems I have with the code of Ansible is it relies heavily upon Jinja to get fun things done. Jinja is like, we're going to take the most important parts of the Python language and then kneecap them all and then change a whole bunch of things so it doesn't look right. And then we're going to reintroduce a couple things that you don't think work, but they actually do, but it's not really documented. And then here you go. And then on top of that, Ansible uses Jinja poorly, in my opinion. In Ansible, okay, so let's compare this. In Saltstack, you can write a file and it's Jinja templated. Saltstack feeds the entire file into the Jinja templater at once. So you can declare things in Jinja code at the top of the file and refer to them later. Well, that's not the way Ansible works. Ansible runs each individual field through a Jinja templater individually. Oh yes. So you cannot declare things in your Jinja code at the top of the file and expect to refer to them later. No. And it's doing this like I think the reason they chose to do this is because you can set a fact and then use it later in your Jinja environment. But it really wasn't well delivered, in my opinion. It really ends up with some awkward code. We're going to see some awkward code here in a bit that I wrote. But really, when you're trying to do some complicated stuff, like, heck, let's just go look at it. I'm going to go dive out to my terminal. Let's go look at my awkward code, shall we? Definitely need to make that bigger. Can you read this in the back? Okay, one more. Is that better? Good enough? Okay, all right, we got some really great eyesight people in here. Let's go one more. We're going to have like no, okay, mouse, come on. There. Is that big enough? Okay, great. Let's go look at my wonderful code. There we go. Actually, I think I already have it open. Nope, I don't. DB filters. So this is something from 3 years ago that I wrote. We have an API matched to a database. The API evolves, as most APIs do. We add integrations, we add features. The database it's attached to also needs to evolve. So we try and version these evolutions, and we Try and make it, there's a name for the pattern and I have no idea what it is, but if your database is on this version and you have a series of improvements or alters to the database DDL, all the way up to the version you're going to, it should match. As long as you always run the alters in the right order and never run them more than once, because we don't make our alters idempotent. As long as you follow those rules, you should be able to upgrade an old system from any arbitrary version to the newest version or whatever you're deploying, right? So the problem is there is a whole bunch of alters just sitting in a directory. Let's go look at that real quick. This one's not in use. Nope, that one is in use. All right. So these are all blank files, just for example. So in my example here, I have a system or a couple systems that are currently on version 4.0.1 of our mysterious software. It's really does a lot of amazing things. It even makes ice for you. It's pretty cool. We have a new version. We skipped 4.1 for some reason, and the devs have just zoomed ahead, and they've already got 4.2 out. So if I'm sitting here at version 4.0.1, I assume that this alter and that alter have been run. It's probably not a safe assumption, but we're going to go with that. So that means I only need to run this alter, and the third one. But I need to run them in that specific order. This is actually really hard to do using Jinja code. Let's go look at why it's hard. So this is all boilerplate at the top. In our appliances, in our systems, you have a main database of some kind, and then you have one or more ancillary production databases. And those are be supplied to this playbook. Actually, earlier in another playbook, this is imported into it. And I've sanitized all the actual corporate stuff out of it. So there's 3 different roles. You could have the head node, you could have the replication node, or you can have the field appliance. And if you have the head node, the main database is named RPT because reasons. The replication node, the main DB, is named rep main. I don't know why they didn't call it RPT. It seemed like a good idea at the time. And if you're a field appliance, you actually have to maintain both of them. Also for reasons that don't make sense to me. So this first step is just declaring what is the main database we have to edit. Okay, that doesn't really apply to our example here. Here's where it gets weird. We need to identify all the alters files in that directory. So we use the find module. We tell it to look in that path. Here's the pattern. We just want those named files. We don't have any recursion in there, but I think in production we actually have some subdirectories. I just want to make sure we're only looking in that directory and finding those files. So we go into that directory. We identify all the files in there. Then we do some trickery with Jinja to make a new fact out of what we just found. So we're going to declare a new fact, alters found, by mapping the object that Ansible returns to just its path. That's all we actually care about. Let's actually run this, and we'll kind of walk through it. Let's make sure this is working before I do anything. Good. All right. Limit to east 1 and playbooks db alters stop YAML. Okay. Watch it crash because it's live. Hey, it didn't crash. Great. Okay. I'm very happy about that. Typically, things always go bad in your presentation, right? So here we go. I added a bunch of debug statements so we can kind of track what it's doing. So this is the identify alter files in that directory. Ansible returns a big data structure in this files array here, or list. And it's a list of dictionaries. That's a little hard to say when your mouth is dry. All sort of information about the file. The only one we really care about here is this path. So we need to dump all the rest of this information. And every file in the directory has the same metadata. It's just a simple module tool, right? So it brings us back too much information. And in Jinja, what we have to do, we have to use the map function, and tell it, I just want the attribute for this. Oh, and another fun thing about Jinja, this happened in Python 3.6 or 3.7 when they stopped actually doing, when you were doing a list comprehension, it didn't make it for you live. It made a, what's the name? Of course I'm having a blank. Instead of pre-running all of the work, it gave you an advancer or whatever the term is, and only when you ask for the next thing will it do the work. So it's trying to do as least amount of work possible. The net result is, if I apply a map to a list, Python won't actually do it until I run the list. Thank you, lazy evaluation. And there's another term that I cannot find, but generate, that's it, the generator, yes. So I think it was Python 3.6, 3.7, it became the default that instead of just rendering your list, it created a generator, and it would render it transparently when you actually needed it, which is great, but Jinja didn't like that. So now, every time you have a data structure that you run an operation to, and you expect a list, you have to explicitly cast it to a list. Didn't have to before. So that was a nice, fun find. If you don't cast it to a list, well, let's see what happens actually. Let's just try this. Okay, we're not going to cast it to a list, and it's going to gripe at us. So the assumption is I have this data structure, I run it through a map, I should get a list back. Okay. That worked when it shouldn't have. Okay, maybe they fixed that. Okay, well, I'll stop ranting about that then. I only want to rant about things that are actually broken. I want to be fair to Ansible. Like there's so much to pick from, right? So, okay. All right, so that actually makes my code a little bit easier to maintain later. Okay, cool. So that was a good experiment. I wish I hadn't learned that in the middle of a presentation. Like live. We are making Ansible suck less live. Isn't that amazing? I don't know when that stopped sucking, but I'm happy about that. Okay, stop. You're going to make me laugh if you keep going. So anyway, so let's just continue like that little 2-minute vignette didn't happen, right? So in our code, we have taken, where is it? Where'd I go? Where'd that, where is it? There it is. Let's go back and look at what it's doing. So this is the first main step, a whole bunch of information. Because we've enlarged the text size, we can't really cram it on the page. The big data structures of all the files. The next step uses Jinja to reduce that down to a list of just the file names. Okay? Reasonable. Well, we actually only really need the versions. Although we do need to remember that the files are there. So the very next Jinja transition I do is to convert the file names to numerics. And I create a separate list. And then, because I need to map the version number I've detected to the actual file. So then I use this zip filter and then run that through addict to items for reasons that I don't remember now. I wrote this code 3 years ago. And I end up with this. Oh, thank you very much. Excellent. I end up with a simple data structure that has a map of key value for the file name and its actual version. Okay, so that took 4 Jinja transitions to get that, and they were non-trivial transitions. And I'm looking at this. This doesn't look very maintainable. I tried to add names and comments. What am I doing? But if someone else is looking at this like, what the hell is this guy doing? Well, I'm trying to get Jinja to do what I actually want it to do. So we've gotten to this part of the code. This was a little fun thing. Sometimes the API team, they'll add an alter and it has an extra tag on the end of it that's only supposed to be applied in certain cases. So I was like, I can't really work around that. I'm just going to ignore it. So, but then they fixed that, so I commented that part of the code out. So now, here's the magic. We have a starting version in our example. Let's see, what's our example? We're starting in version 4.0.1, and we want to go to reports, version 4.2.2. Just because there's a version release doesn't mean there's an alter that goes with it in this example. So we have this ugly thing. We take the map that you just saw, we run it through reject, which is a filter that you give it a function or an attribute to examine, some operation of some kind, and anything in the list that doesn't match or doesn't pass, it tosses it out. So we run through 3 rejections in a row. First says if the version of the alter that I'm looking at here would be the value field. If the version is less than the current version, we don't need it, right? We've already applied that. So now we end up, after that first step, we end up with a list of alters that would be In this instance, just starting here at 4.1.0 and on. And then, because sometimes we have more alters than, like sometimes I have the code deployed to a later version, but I don't need to go to it yet. So I have another one that says, don't go past the version we're going to, right? In this case, we're trying to go to version 4.2.2. And then I had to come back in and add another one. The logic was unfortunately trying to run the alter for the same version that was already installed, and it was not very idempotent. So I added a third reject. If it exactly matches, if the alter exactly matches the current version, then don't use it either. So the end result of all that is you end up with a data structure. These are all the alters needed for this particular upgrade operation, taking the appliance or the backend system from 4.0.1 to 4.2.2. That was an awful lot of work in Jinja to get this. This would be like 3 commands in Python. All right, we could do this very quickly. And we're going to, actually. So I chopped the rest of this playbook. It's going into the database and actually making the changes. But this is what we're looking at for our example here. If you were reading that code and you didn't have me to consult, what would your first thought be? What the hell is this guy doing? Why did he do it this way? Well, at the time I was not familiar with custom modules, and I was like, well, this is how I have to do it. I spent a long time going through all the Jinja operations and getting them just right. Lots of failures. It was like a very slow iterative process to get this little piece going. It was like 6 or 7 hours of just plugging away at it, because Jinja does not make things easy. And as I alluded to earlier, Jinja is sometimes, how do I put this politely? It does more than you expect, and it also does less than you expect. So if you have like a list object, in Jinja you can actually refer to the object itself, and any method that's attached to the object will work, whether or not you're actually running a Jinja filter or not. So you can, lists have, let's see, do I have that up? What are the methods of list? Any of these work in Jinja. But that's not well documented. It just kind of happens. Now, we're not supposed to use this because that makes for unmaintainable code, but sometimes we have to, right? All of these functions work in Jinja as long as you've got the object dot notation, and then you just invoke the methods. It happens transparently. Jinja doesn't mention it. You heard it here if you've never seen that before. Don't use it because it's confusing, right? Sometimes it's unavoidable. Let's say this. As a ground rule, if you have to do something confusing with Jinja or abuse it somehow, probably you're better off writing a custom module, because that'll be actual Python. It'll be a lot easier to understand, and it'll be a lot easier to maintain by somebody else when you get hit by a bus, which is a really important thing. I'm always trying to code thinking of the bus factor. Like, it can't just be me that knows how this works, because I don't want to be getting a call at 11 p.m. trying to run this piece of code. I want somebody else to run the piece of code and take that call. But if I'm the only one that can operate it, then they have to call me. So we're going to take this ugly Jinja junk. We're going to make it into a custom module. And I'm realizing, how much time do we have? A long time. I want to pause here on this and go to the Saltstack part, because this could take a while, and I don't want to miss out on talking about the Saltstack stuff. If you guys will bear with me, right? Okay, where's my presentation? Skipping ahead. So this is a thing I learned recently. Having fumbled around with inventories for a long time and the dynamic aspect of it, I was getting irritated at it. And I was like, well, I've used Saltstack a lot in the past, and it does inventory that's built in. You can query for systems that are online or not. It pre-stores, it'll pull all the grains information and then store it in the master, so you can make decisions on what minions you need to talk to, and you don't have to consult the minion for that information. If you run Ansible playbooks, the first step in every Ansible playbook is to go pull facts from every possible minion you're talking to. Well, that can take a while, especially if you're targeting all, or if some of your systems are at the middle of nowhere using LTE, an appliance, or you just have a whole lot of them. That can take a long time. So Saltstack has all that already cached. Why don't we just use that? So we came up with the way it worked. We're using now the newest platform image that we have. One of the specifications mandates that it must self-join to the Saltmaster. And right now we're not using it for anything other than just a list of systems, but it makes it really easy. I haven't yet written the inventory plugin that goes and pulls the list from Saltstack. But I will demonstrate here, you don't have to have SSH set up to talk to a salt minion. Let's go look at that. Oh, that's right, I opened Python there. All right, so I want to go. There we are. Okay, so I set up an inventory for our examples here. Let's just look at it, Self 2023 example. So I have a couple systems, East 1 through 5. I had a me from last year's example, and some other ones that I don't need, so I commented them out. And then I declared some groups in here so we could run that sample code and it would actually pick out the right main database. And then I was playing around. I just installed a salt master and a salt minion on this laptop. I got them both running. The salt minion talked to the salt master. Have you guys seen salt? You seen how that works? Anybody here something familiar? Let's look at that real quick, because it's pretty cool. So, right. I have to be root. Hang on a second. Okay, now, as root, I have just the one system in here. Well, that's lovely. Thank you for my deprecation warnings. Does anybody know how to turn this off? It's been a while since I've used Saltstack. I don't know why it's doing that. So the important thing to look at here, this system is named Limitado because I was feeling creative. And it's the only system accepted on the Salt Master. So we can do things like this, just do a simple test.ping. It works while complaining. We can do more complicated stuff. Anyway. So this is Saltstack. It's all the systems that are registered to the Salt Master. It grabs they're called grains, basically facts about the system, and you can make decisions on running a state file or running an operation against systems that have a declared grain of this that also equals that. You can do a lot more complicated searching and targeting in Saltstack than you can in Ansible. So that's why I would prefer to use it. Work doesn't agree with that, so we're stuck with Ansible. But I snuck Saltstack in anyway. Can't keep a good man down. So I have the one system, Limitado. And in Salt, they use a 0MQ, I think, for messaging. And a message goes out on the bus from the Salt Master out to the minion in particular. It's addressed to it, and the minion does whatever it's told to do. So that message bus is always active. So I don't need SSH to talk to that minion because I've got the message bus. So in Ansible, you SSH to all of your systems, right? If you use Saltstack, you don't have to rely upon SSH at all because you've already done the heavy lifting to get it into an inventory, and ideally you've validated that this system belongs because you had to accept the key. Those of you using Saltstack with auto accept, we need to have a conversation afterwards. That's dangerous. By auto accept, I mean when a salt minion first joins to the Salt Master, it says, here's my personal key, please like me. And you have to accept it. So a lot of auto-loading stuff. A lot of companies just set it up so that the Salt Master automatically accepts any minion that says, hey, I've got a key. And that means you can slip other systems into the Salt Master. Not related to what we're talking about. Okay, so going back 3 steps. We have Salt Master with one salt minion attached to it, this system. And we want to go talk to that in Ansible. So I just declared it. Show me. No. I just declared it in my inventory file. I created a new group. This is how I tend to apply weird effects like which connection you're going to use, or if you have an alias of some kind, I tend to like to put that into a special group so I can refer to it later. So I created in the inventory a group, Ansible connection Saltstack. I then created inventory a group var Saltstack. Now it does, any host that's in this particular group uses Ansible connection as Saltstack. Oh, hang on a second. LS, not LS, excuse me. There it is. It's just declaring, instead of using the typical SSH mechanism, we're going to use a different connection mechanism, Saltstack. And it's been in Ansible for years, so I don't think it's used very often. But it works great. Let's test it. Ansible ping. was it limitado, right? Oh. Permission denied. Oh, right, because I'm supposed to run this as root. Yep, okay. So let's go. Code, 2023, the project. All right, as root, I'm in here. Now I should be able to do this. Whoops. Oh, right. Where's my virtual environment? There we go. Try it again. There we go. This didn't use SSH. I haven't given it any SSH parameters at all. I'm not SSHing to my own system. This is using the Saltstack 0MQ communication method to send information to the salt minion. So if you don't mind introducing a second tool, and I prefer Saltstack inventory management, you don't have to use SSH everywhere because you've got this already built-in message bus. What else can we do with this, right? Let's try something more advanced. Ansible. I don't think this is going to work because I don't have sudo set up. Shell-a systemctl stop salt minion. That'll be fun. We're going to tell the salt minion to stop itself. I don't think this is going to work though because I don't have sudo set up. Yeah, that didn't like that. Okay, what didn't it like? Yeah, it's the salt stack is using 0MQ to send its messages, and Ansible, the module. Oh, actually, we can just go look at it. It's not. I don't know. That whatever that guy said. Port 505, port 506. Thank you. I should probably know that, but I don't. So it just kind of works because Saltstack is already set up. And you can, we saw earlier, I was able to issue a ping to it. We could do whatever we want to the limitado host that's in Saltstack. Ansible, okay, so in order for it to work, you must have the Saltstack egg, or whatever it is, the wheel, downloaded into your virtual environment. So you have to have both Ansible and Saltstack installed in the same virtual environment. And the code for it is just like this. Let's go look at that, right? I'm very firmly in the camp of we just look at things and learn about them, right? Where am I? Ansible 8, lib, Python 311, site packages, Ansible. Okay, so here we're actually in the Ansible code base. Let's try this again. A little easier to see. That's really tough to see on my screen, this blue. Is it easier for you guys? Yeah. Okay, that's good. So this is going to be in the connection plugins. If you've never ventured through the Ansible code base, it's actually quite illuminating. It's also a little bit scary. But if you're going to start writing modules, which we're about to do, if we don't run out of time, you'll probably want to be looking at Ansible code for reference, because it's preferred that if Ansible has a mechanism, like a version compare code, Ansible has its own version compare, and it prefers using that over Python's loose version. It's actually modeled on loose version. But if there's a function in Ansible, the standard is to prefer using the Ansible thing over something else. There's a whole lot of good boilerplate code and input validation code and all kind of stuff buried in here. So if you haven't ventured into the Ansible code base, I do recommend spending at least a little time so that the next time when you need a reference, you have somewhere to go to. And then, take a shower after you've looked at the Ansible code. So here we go. We're looking at connection plugins specifically. Why is that not there? All right, where is this? I was literally looking at this earlier. Let's go find that. Saltstack. Anything named Saltstack in this code base? Okay, that's interesting. I don't know what happened to that. We're in the right directory. Huh. Okay, so if the connection module doesn't exist, then how does this work? How? I'm sorry? Okay. Ah, that's why, because they split it into, yeah, okay. Thank you. Good advice. Back when they introduced collections and started splitting up the code base between core and collections, they decide functions that belonged in core and functions that belonged in the collections, and it got very, very, very messy very fast. Come on, Ansible collections. Why isn't that working? Oh. Thank you. Appreciate all of you guiding me. All right, so now that we're in the right Python project, now we're going to go to plugins. Nope. This is a collection, so we got to go to community, general, plugins. There we go, connection. There it is. Okay, this is actually a really short module. And all it's doing, some boilerplate documentation and simple imports, Ansible error handling, the default Ansible connection class, and then some some test code to make sure you actually have Saltstack. I don't actually know how this would work if you don't have Saltstack installed. I would expect it to just print an error there, but they're trying to be polite, I guess. And then this is it. This is all there is. So we subclass off of the Ansible connection class. We have, so here we go, self.client. This is where it is pulling from, where's Salt? It's supposed to be pulling in. Okay, so it's being handed a data structure. So there's just not a lot of code to this. It uses the Salt Python module, and through that mechanism is able to go in. This is why I think you have to run it as root, because it's actually going and poking at the infrastructure or the inventory that Salt has. So in order to communicate with the Salt master, you would need to be the root user. Unless you've done the rootless Salt, which is a whole nother talk that we're not going into. And basically, you're just in Python, you're asking the Salt code to ask the Salt master, hey, what host do you know of? And it just returns it and creates a simple data structure here. And it just kind of works. I would expect something this complicated to be like 4,000 lines, but it's 200. There's not much. There's some, so in Ansible, when you're copying a file out, it uses the SCP mechanism in the background if you're doing a file.copy or something. You can't do that if you're not using SSH. So they had to come up with a different mechanism for putting files and fetching files. So they've built that into this library here. And I think that's all they had to overdo. Yeah. So everything else just kind of works. It's very simple code. It just kind of happens. I'm really loving using it. And I haven't finished writing the inventory plugin for Ansible that will fetch all that stuff nicely and create groups from it, but it's coming. And I might be able to talk about that next year if you guys are interested. Okay, so that is the Saltstack side of things. Before I move back to the module development, do we have any questions on Saltstack or anyone want to see something? Great. Okay, so returning back to this part. We already ranted about Jinja. Oh, yeah. Wow, that is really impossible to read. Okay, so I'm going to read these out. The first bubble says, Ansible runs the template per field instead of per file. That's what we talked about earlier. The second bubble says, Ansible renders some variables immediately and others it leaves for later. Why? I talked about this last year in my talk. So if you're actually importing playbooks or roles and you supply a vars attachment to that, it will wait to render whatever you've put in that field until after you're in the new module, which can really get you in trouble. I've had some weird code. I don't know why Ansible chooses to do that. It seems like at the time I'm importing is when I would want to render that variable and then pass the result in, but it doesn't do that. I don't understand why. So the third bubble that you can't read says inconsistent behavior. We've been ranting about that the whole time. And the fourth one says you end up with Eldritch abominations of Jinja code that nobody else can maintain, which was in my description. And that's really what I'm trying to avoid. So we're going to write our own module, or at least get started in doing so. Two resources of importance here. When I post the presentation, you'll be able to follow this. They're from the development guide. One is the general developing modules help file, and the other one is developing locally so that you can easily bring your module in. There's a couple tricks if you're using a role for your module versus a collection. There's a couple things to be aware of. So let's see. We're going to do this together. First thing we're going to do, we're going to remind ourselves what our code does. Where was it? Let's just go back and run that playbook again so I can refresh myself. East 1, and it was playbooks, db alters. Hi, Fred. How are you? Thanks for visiting. All right, so I've run my code again. The net result of all this ghastly Jinja is this data structure here, alters needed. That would be fed into later code. So we want to produce this in a module instead. Bye, Fred. Thanks. He was? Oh, joke was he was looking for chef. Very, very sorry. Very clever. So let's try and duplicate this functionality in Python. First, let's just do it in a Python REPL, right? Let's make it easy. Oops, that's the actual code. That's where we were digging around in Ansible. I guess we'll use one of these. By the way, I'm flipping back and forth rapidly between screens in the GNU screen tool, if anyone's curious. Tmux equivalent. I've been using screen for coming on 20 years and just kind of don't feel like changing. Yeah, rock on screen group. Yes. So let's see. Let's go back to 2023 into my collection. Already started on something, I think. Modules. What am I having here? All right, so I went to, let's just follow this. When you're writing a module, they give you some boilerplate to follow. Oh, come on. There we go, that's better. So when you're developing a module in Ansible, blah, 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 blah. If you're developing a module in collection, which I am, but we just want to look at the simple stuff. Creating a module, okay? Here, it gives an example if you're creating a module of any kind. Oh, I should say this. In Ansible, modules and plugins are the same thing. But plugins are expected to be run on the master which you're running from, and modules are expected to be run on the remote systems. They both use the same code base in the back, the same code even. Boilerplate, which is used by both the master and the minions, that's Saltstack terminology, using the Ansible controller and the hosts, that's generally put into a module that both import. But it has an example here. If you just copy this boilerplate in, then we can look at this if we want. If you remember from looking at the Saltstack connection, that's just kind of always a thing they have in here. I think it's for backwards compatibility, but since we're not supporting Python 2.7 anymore, and if you have any Python 2.7 applications, please talk to me after this talk. We need to have an intervention. There are still people running 2.7 stuff. You know who you are. We're not going to shame anybody publicly. Just talk to me after, right? Because we need to address it if you're still using it. So in Ansible, I don't know what this does. I just know I'm supposed to put it in the module. They want you to put in some doc strings right at the top. If you're using a Python linter, the linter will hate that because it expects you to put the imports first before you start declaring variables. So if you use a Python linter, just put your disable at the top. So this is a bunch of description and any options that are expected for your module. Think of like the file module, and you have what's the path, what's the mode, user, owner. All those would be cataloged here in options. In fact, let's just look at that. Nope, that's not it. Stop. Ansible doc. It's a really powerful tool. All right, here we go. Nope, that's not the right one. Here we go. Ansible doc, when it goes and pulls information, let's just look at, no, that's not going to work. Module file, I think. Yeah. So this boilerplate documentation comes from that doc string at the top of your module. So you can skip it, but I advise you not to, especially if you're trying to write maintainable code. You want to document carefully what are my expected options, what are the defaults, what's required and what's not. So Ansible has created the data structures for you to declare these. You can declare it either in the doc string, which it will interpret as long as it's in the right format, or you can create an argument spec. And it's a series of nested dictionaries That's modeled somewhere in the documentation. When I wrote my inventory plugin, I just used the docstring because I was putting all the effort to document it anyway. I might as well let it do the heavy lifting for me. So you do want your docstring. And then they usually also say, include an example of how to use it. In this case, they're a very simple module. Just you invoke the module and you give it a name. My mouse is acting up. It knows that we're presenting right now, so it's trying to sabotage me. Oh, this is a new docstring. I don't remember this one. Okay, skipping all the docstrings. Here we go. We're finally importing from Ansible. This is where you might go diving into the code base to see what basic things are in there, what you might need to import. Because we're creating an Ansible module, we need to have the Ansible module base class. So this is a mandatory import. There's probably other things in Ansible that you're going to want to import as well. And having imported this class, there's an expected function also. Where's the, oh, I see what it's doing. So they've imported the class purely so they can use the argspec, I think. So your module file must have a run module. And I believe it's a file per module also. And whatever internal functions you create, you should do the typical Python namespacing where you put an underscore in front of it. That doesn't mean you can't access the function from outside. It just means you're not supposed to. So if you have stuff that communicates with an API server internally and you don't want to expose that functionality, put an underscore in front of your methods, effectively. So this boilerplate here is doing an awful lot of stuff that I don't actually care about. I don't really care about check mode. I don't ever use that. If you do, you're actually way ahead of me. Modify the state. Okay, this is just them having fun with their little hello world module. If we've given it an option new, we say it's been changed. So the expectation is you'll have this function. Where is it? Come on. This function. You'll have an argspec. Interesting. They've got it both defined in the docstring and here. Okay. And your run module function will return a result that looks like this. So if you're writing custom modules, I suggest always starting from this boilerplate and this modifying. Or pick a different module that's in the code base and start from that. Rip out the stuff that doesn't do what you want and replace it with the stuff that you want it to do. It's Python, you know, have fun. So let's see. I don't remember that. I'm still learning how to write these, by the way. I tend to pick topics that force me to learn stuff, and so I've been like learning as fast as I can about this and trying to code my own stuff. I didn't make it all the way to the finish line before I got here, so we're learning together about some of these, how some of these things go together. So let's see. Check mode, we've already ranted about that. Our result, data structure, or in every Ansible module, you're supposed to tell Ansible if your module made a change to the system or not, so that you can take actions on that. Or if it failed, you can set the fail flag. You're not explicitly like bombing out of Ansible, you just set the result, the fail flag and result to true. And Ansible knows how to handle that and go, oh, that module failed. So your module should not, it should handle all exceptions properly, and it should return a result back to Ansible no matter what you did, because Ansible should be handling your error for you. So keep that in mind. And I believe this result dictionary is documented somewhere in the developer guide. I don't remember where, sorry. I've got 12 minutes. Okay, so I need to probably start winding this down then, because I imagine there's some questions. So this is the boilerplate for the module. Let's go see if we can very quickly write something that does a thing. We want, nope, where are we? Didn't I have Python REPL open somewhere? All right, I'll just start it here. Okay, so I need to port OS. Gosh, I can't, now that I'm looking at it, I can't remember how to, I've done this 1,000 times. Does anybody remember how to get the contents of a directory in Python? I guess we'll just look it up. Python, look at that. I searched for it recently. That's it, lister, thank you. Right there, top entry. So I would do something, yeah. Alters equals os dot lister, oops. to this path. I'm hard setting it for now because we're an example. Okay, that's good, like that. So now I have, because I like this. So I have a list of all the files in that directory. That was a lot easier than what we did in Jinja. It was like one operation, right? And then import loose version, I believe. What is this? Python loose version. I have all this Python code running around in my head that I cannot catalog or can't keep straight. So pretty much as I'm coding, I'm constantly going and looking things up. I don't know if you guys code that way too. Okay, great. So I'm not the only one. Thank you for the solidarity. I appreciate that. What was I looking for? Loose version. Oh, they deprecated it. That's why. I know Ansible has a loose version though, so let's just pull it from Ansible. From Ansible module utils import loose version, I believe is what it is. Nope, that's not it. This example is going really great, isn't it? So let's pretend that worked. So in Python, what I would be doing, I get the list of files in the directory. I can easily parse out using a list comprehension the version in one instruction, not 20. And then I can very easily filter them out using the loose version and a comprehension. And then I just return that data structure. I guess it would be in the result. And you would, in your Ansible code, you would invoke this custom module. It would do a thing. It would return some data. You know what data it's returning because you wrote the thing. And then you can use that result and iterate over it using Ansible Jinja code effectively. Since we're running very low on time, I would love to go deeper into the actual module itself, but I talked too much. I apologize. Let's stop here and say questions, comments, things you wish to share. Anybody?
So technically you're taking a huge piece of really ugly code and you're moving it into a module kind of like a function call?
Yes, effectively that's what's happening.
Okay.
It's still kind of ugly usually, but it's Python ugly, which is actually kind of elegant, right? The Zen of Python says we should be writing nice, clean code. And it's a lot less clunky than Jinja because you actually get to use all the features of Python. Other questions, comments? Right there.
So I'm guessing that if you would recommend if someone is free to choose a tool for administration, just use Saltstack. Is that what you would say?
Don't use Ansible. Use Saltstack if you have a choice.
You would
That's
say
my
use
preference.
Saltstack. Okay.
Now, I live in the Python world. That's my preference. If you're more of a Ruby dev, you'd probably choose Chef over Puppet. They've both been around forever. But if I'm picking, and the higher ups actually listen to me, I pick Saltstack. I came into the job I'm in now. They were already using Ansible. I couldn't change that direction, unfortunately. Other questions, comments? Anybody want to rant about Ansible? Now's your time. You got an audience. Oh, come on. Surely someone has something to gripe about Ansible. I'm sorry? Can you over here? Go ahead. Free license to gripe about Ansible. How often do you get that?
Yeah, I just hate the when clause and conditional handling in Ansible.
Yeah, the when clause. Also, in the examples code that Ansible usually publishes, the when clause is at the bottom of the module declaration. I don't know why that is. It's
Yeah, that's crazy.
when I write my code, I actually write the name field, and the very first thing after that is the when. Because I don't care what the rest of it is if my when clause isn't going to pass. Now, technically in YAML, the order doesn't matter. You're just declaring a fact or a thing, an atomic unit, so your when clause is just an atomic unit. Doesn't matter the order that you write it in your code. But as a human, it does matter because you're trying to read your code vertically. We're top to bottom readers. And I just always put my when clause right after the name. If you guys aren't doing that now, I highly suggest that it makes for more readable and maintainable code. Other gripes or comments? Well, maybe you don't want to share it. Oh, there we go. Got another one. You can always come up after the talk and we can gripe together. I love griping about Ansible.
So disclaimer, I don't do Ansible, but I am a developer. And you had mentioned the fact that when you syntactically declare a block, it waits until it's invoked before it evaluates the
In certain conditions, yes.
Yeah, so in my world, that's called a closure.
Okay.
And as you declare it, it's evaluated at the time. So the fact that it doesn't do that is really freaking weird to me.
Yeah, actually, it's really weird to me too. So the reason I stumbled onto this is because I was actually trying to write a nice user-proof tool with error checking and pre-evaluation of inputs. And so I was, again, also trying to use don't repeat yourself patterns. And so I had separated my playbooks out, and one was importing another. So I had the boilerplate pre-flight checking in one, and then I was passing in what I thought would be a simple data structure to the imported playbook. And the playbook had its own little early check, just for sanity, and it kept failing. And I'm like, what's going on? So I actually stopped, and I went into the imported playbook, and I added the bug line to see what was this variable actually. And it spit out the code that I had put in the vars line. And I'm like, what? And I didn't know how to force it to interpret. So I actually ended up having to set the fact again. So you've got this variable coming in, and then I had to set the fact, what was already been set, just to force it to render. I was like, that's so dumb. I've never heard of that before. I don't know why that's the normal. So we're running up. We got 4 minutes. Anybody else? Comments, questions, gripes? All right. Thank you very much, guys. Appreciate it.
Jeremy wanted me to announce that the Birds of a Feather, there's a whiteboard out in the hall about the Birds of the Feather talks. There's one starting at 1:30, but if you're interested, take a look if you're interested in any of the Birds of a Feather talk. Thank you.